In a small Midwestern town where autumn leaves painted the streets in shades of gold and crimson, a story of courage and justice was about to unfold. Let me tell you about a remarkable day at Lincoln Heights High School that changed everything. Comment where you're watching from today as we dive into this incredible tale. The morning had started like any other at Lincoln Heights. Students shuffled through the hallways, lockers clanked open and shut, and the usual buzz of teenage conversation filled the air. Among them was Amira Hassan, a bright 16-year-old sophomore whose purple hijab stood out against her Navy school uniform. She had always worn her hijab with pride, just as her mother and grandmother had done before her. Principal Davidson, a man known for his strict adherence to rules, watched from his office window as students filed into the building. He had been running Lincoln Heights for 15 years, and in his mind, tradition meant everything. The school's dress code had remained unchanged during his tenure, and he intended to keep it that way. That morning, as Amira walked into her first period, class, she noticed the whispers and stares. It wasn't unusual. She had grown accustomed to being one of the few Muslim students at Lincoln Heights, but today felt different. The tension in the air was palpable. During third period, the classroom intercom crackled to life. Amira Hassan, please report to the principal's office immediately. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. With quiet dignity, Amira gathered her books and made her way down the empty hallway. In Principal Davidson's office, the confrontation began. "Miss Hassan," he said, his voice stern and unwavering, "your headscarf violates our school's dress code policy. We've been lenient, but I'm afraid I can no longer overlook this infraction." Amira's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, my hijab is part of my religious expression. It's protected by the First Amendment." Principal Davidson's expression hardened. "The dress code applies to everyone equally. Rules are rules, Miss Hassan. Either remove the hijab or I'll have to suspend you." Word of the confrontation spread through the school like wildfire. Students began texting their parents, and soon local news outlets picked up the story. But what no one expected was the involvement of Usha Vance, a civil rights attorney who had recently moved to town. As Amira sat in the guidance counselor's office, tears threatening to fall but her resolve unbroken, her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Hold strong, Habibti. Help is coming." That afternoon, an emergency school board meeting was called. The small conference room was packed with concerned parents, students, and community members. Principal Davidson stood at the podium, defending his position with bureaucratic precision. "Our dress code has served this school well for decades," he declared. "Making exceptions would undermine the very foundation of our disciplinary structure." But then the door opened and Usha Vance walked in. Her presence commanded attention immediately. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had fought and won many battles in the courtroom. "Mr. Davidson," she began, her voice clear and measured, "I've reviewed your school's dress code policy, and I must inform you that your interpretation not only violates the First Amendment, but also Title VII of the Civil Rights Act." The room hung on her every word as she continued. "Religious expression is not a privilege to be granted or withheld at an administrator's discretion. It is a fundamental right guaranteed by our Constitution." Principal Davidson's face reddened. "Miss Vance, with all due respect, you don't understand the complexities of running a school." "On the contrary," Usha interrupted smoothly, "I understand them very well. I've successfully represented 17 similar cases across 3 states. Would you like me to cite the precedents?" The tension in the room shifted. School board members exchanged worried glances. Parents who had been sitting quietly began to murmur in support of Usha's words. Furthermore, Usha continued, pulling out a folder, "I have here documented cases of religious accommodations your school has made for other students. Selective, Enforcement of rules is a form of discrimination, Mr. Davidson. As she spoke, more community members began arriving. Rabbi Goldstein from the local synagogue stepped forward, speaking about the importance of religious freedom. Reverend Johnson from the First Baptist Church stood up, declaring his support for Amira's right to practice her faith. The story was becoming bigger than just one student's hijab. It was about the very values their community claimed to uphold. Local news cameras captured every moment as more supporters filled the hallway outside the conference room. Principal Davidson's position began to crumble as school board members, one by one, voiced their support for changing the policy. The chairman of the board, Mrs. Anderson, finally spoke up. "I move to amend the dress code to explicitly protect religious expression, effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. As the meeting concluded, Usha approached Amira and her family. "Your courage today will make a difference for many students to come," she said softly. Amira's mother, tears in her eyes, hugged her daughter. "Allah works in mysterious ways," she whispered. "Sometimes it takes one person standing firm in their faith to bring about change." The next day, Amira walked into Lincoln Heights wearing her hijab, head held high. But she wasn't alone anymore. Several non-Muslim students had donned headscarves in solidarity, and "Stand with Amira" buttons appeared on backpacks throughout the school. Principal Davidson, humbled by the experience, issued a public apology. "Our school's strength lies in our diversity," he admitted. "Sometimes it takes courage to acknowledge when we're wrong and make things right." The story spread beyond their small town, inspiring other schools to review their policies. Amira received messages from Muslim students across the country thanking her for standing up for their rights. 1 week later, at a special school assembly, Usha Vance addressed the student body. "Change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it starts with one person brave enough to stand up for what's right." Amira didn't just fight for herself. She fought for every student's right to be true to their faith and identity. Has someone ever tried to make you hide who you are? Have you ever had to stand up for your beliefs? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, your voice matters, and sometimes the quietest stance can create the loudest change, and this is just the beginning of our story. Stay tuned for what happens next, as this small-town victory sparks a movement that will touch lives across the nation. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring true stories of courage and justice. The morning after the school board meeting, the story of Amira Hassan and Usha Vance exploded across social media. National news networks picked up the footage of the confrontation, and suddenly their small Midwestern town found itself at the center of a nationwide conversation about religious freedom in schools. Usha Vance's email inbox flooded with messages from other Muslim students facing similar discrimination. Her phone rang constantly with calls from major news outlets seeking interviews, but Usha knew this victory at Lincoln Heights was just the beginning of a much larger battle. "The story isn't just about a hijab," Usha explained during a CNN interview. "It's about every student's right to receive an education without compromising their faith or identity." Her composed demeanor and articulate responses made her an instant media sensation. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Heights, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Students who had never spoken to Amira before now approached her in the hallways, sharing their own stories of feeling different or excluded. The school's Muslim Student Association, which had previously consisted of only 3 members, suddenly grew to 30 students. But with increased visibility came unexpected challenges. A small but vocal group of parents, led by local businessman Robert Henderson, began protesting outside the school. They carried signs reading, "Keep religion out of schools," and "Tradition matters." Henderson, speaking to local reporters, declared, "This is about maintaining standards. Once you start making exceptions, where does it end? Today it's hijabs, tomorrow it could be anything." Usha Vance, however, was no stranger to opposition. She had spent years building cases that protected religious freedom while maintaining educational standards. When she learned about Henderson's protests, she didn't respond with anger or confrontation. Instead, she invited him to a public forum at the local community center. The evening of the forum, the community center's main hall was packed. Local television stations set up their cameras as Usha took the stage alongside Henderson. What followed was a masterclass in civil discourse. "Mr. Henderson," Usha began, "I understand your concern about standards, but let me ask you something. What values are we really teaching our students when we force them to choose between their education and their faith?" Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's about equality, everyone following the same rules." "But true equality," Usha countered, "isn't about treating everyone exactly the same. It's about ensuring everyone has the same opportunities to succeed while respecting their fundamental rights." As the debate continued, something unexpected happened. Henderson's daughter, Emma, stood up from the audience. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "remember when Grandma told us about how she had to hide her Star of David necklace in school? How is this any different?" The room fell silent. Henderson's face softened as he looked at his daughter, then back at Usha. It was a moment of profound realization that would later be shared thousands of times on social media. But while the local community was coming together, larger forces were at work. A conservative political action committee, sensing an opportunity to make this a national issue, began running advertisements questioning the erosion of traditional values in American schools. Usha received anonymous threats, warning her to stick to her own cases, but those who thought they could intimidate her didn't know her history. As the daughter of immigrants who had faced discrimination herself, she had developed an unwavering commitment to justice. The situation took another turn when Dr. Elizabeth Palmer, a renowned educational policy expert, arrived in town. She had been following the case closely and saw it as a perfect example of how schools could adapt to serve increasingly diverse student populations. "What's happening at Lincoln Heights," Dr. Palmer explained during a school assembly, "isn't just about religious accommodation. It's about creating an educational environment where every student can bring their whole self to school." The assembly was being recorded for a documentary about religious freedom in American schools, and Amira was asked to speak. Standing at the podium, she looked out at her fellow students. "When I was told to remove my hijab," she said, "I felt like I was being asked to remove a part of who I am. But thanks to Ms. Vance and all of you who stood with me, I learned that our differences don't divide us, they make us stronger." Her words resonated beyond the auditorium. The hashtag #StandWithAmira trended nationally, and students across the country began sharing their own stories of religious discrimination. Usha, Vance's law office became a hub of activity. She started receiving calls from civil rights organizations offering support and resources. The American Civil Liberties Union reached out to partner with her on similar cases across the country. But perhaps the most significant development came when Representative Maria Gonzalez, a member of the House Education Committee, announced she would be introducing legislation to clarify religious accommodation requirements in public schools. "The Lincoln Heights case," Representative Gonzalez stated, "has shown us that we need clear, consistent guidelines to protect students' religious freedoms while maintaining educational standards." Principal Davidson, who had initially resisted the change, became an unexpected ally. He began working with Usha to develop a comprehensive religious accommodation policy that would serve as a model for other schools. Sometimes, he admitted during a staff meeting, it takes someone challenging our assumptions to help us grow. Ms. Vance didn't just change our dress code, she helped us become a better school. The transformation at Lincoln Heights was remarkable. The school's Diversity Celebration Week, previously a minor event, became a major celebration featuring student presentations about their various religious and cultural traditions. Usha Vance watched these changes with quiet satisfaction, but she knew their work wasn't finished. Late one evening, as she was preparing documents for similar cases in neighboring districts, she received an unexpected visitor. Robert Henderson walked into her office, his daughter Emma beside him. "Miss Vance," he said, "I owe you an apology, and we need your help. Emma's friend at another school is facing similar discrimination. Would you be willing to take the case?" Usha smiled, opening her calendar. "Mr. Henderson, this is exactly why we do this work. Change happens one conversation, one person, one case at a time." As news spread of more schools adopting Lincoln Heights' new policies, Amira reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. Her mother had always told her that standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's always worth it. The chapter ends with Usha Vance receiving a letter from a young girl in California. "Dear Ms. Vance, I wear a hijab too, and thanks. To you and Amira, I'm not afraid anymore. You showed me that one person's courage can change everything. Have you ever stood up for someone else's rights? Have you witnessed a moment when someone's perspective completely changed? Share your stories in the comments below. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, where we'll see how this local victory transforms into a national movement and how Usha Vance faces her biggest challenge yet. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage and justice. The ripple effects of the Lincoln Heights case continued to spread across the nation, but not everyone was celebrating the victory. As Usha Vance prepared for her morning commute, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. A powerful conservative think tank, the American Traditional Values Institute, ATVI, had just announced a legal challenge to the school's new religious accommodation policy. The ATVI's lead attorney, Maxwell Sterling, was a formidable opponent known for dismantling progressive policies. "This isn't about religious freedom," he declared on national television. "It's about maintaining the fundamental structure of American education. We can't have different rules for different students." Usha knew Sterling's reputation well. They had faced each other in court before, and she understood his tactics. But this time was different. This wasn't just about legal arguments. It was about the lives and dignity of students across the country. Meanwhile, Amira had become an unexpected symbol of resistance. Her Instagram account, where she shared her daily experiences and encouraged other Muslim students to embrace their identity, had grown to over 100,000 followers. But with visibility came vulnerability. One morning, Amira arrived at school to find her locker vandalized with hateful messages. The incident shook the school community. But what happened next demonstrated how much things had changed. Without prompting, hundreds of students decorated their own lockers with messages of support and symbols from various faiths and cultures. Principal Davidson, once the enforcer of rigid rules, now stood as a fierce defender of his students' rights. "This act of hate," he announced over the school intercom, "has only strengthened our commitment to creating an inclusive environment where every student feels safe and respected." Usha Vance knew they needed to act quickly to counter the ATVI's challenge. She assembled a diverse team of legal experts, religious scholars, and education specialists. Among them was Dr. James Richardson, a constitutional law professor who had written extensively about religious freedom in schools. "What we're seeing here," Dr. Richardson explained during a strategy session, is a fundamental misunderstanding of the First Amendment. Religious accommodation isn't preferential treatment, it's the protection of a basic constitutional right. The media coverage intensified as the ATVI case gained momentum. Conservative outlets painted the situation as a threat to traditional values, while progressive media celebrated it as a victory for religious freedom. In the middle of this storm, Usha maintained her characteristic composure. During a particularly heated television debate with Maxwell Sterling, Usha calmly stated, "Mr. Sterling, would you ask a Jewish student to remove his yarmulke? Would you demand a Christian student remove her cross necklace? Religious expression isn't a threat to education. It's an essential part of who we are as Americans." The debate caught the attention of Supreme Court Justice Elena Martinez, who was scheduled to speak at a nearby law school. In her address, without directly mentioning the Lincoln Heights case, she emphasized the importance of protecting religious freedom in public institutions. Back at Lincoln Heights, students had organized their own response to the controversy. Led by Emma Henderson, they launched a campaign called "My Faith, My Right" that quickly spread to other schools. Students of all faiths began sharing their stories of religious expression and supporting each other's right to practice their beliefs. Usha's phone rang late one evening. It was a call from Representative Gonzalez. "The opposition is stronger than we anticipated," the Congresswoman warned. "They're trying to attach amendments to my bill that would effectively nullify its protections. We need your help in Washington." Within days, Usha found herself testifying before the House Education Committee. The hearing room was packed as she delivered her statement. "When we tell students they must choose between their education and their faith, we're not just violating their rights. We're teaching them that conformity is more valuable than conviction." Her testimony was interrupted by hostile questioning from opponents, but Usha remained unshaken. When one congressman suggested that religious accommodations would lead to chaos in schools, she responded, "The only chaos I've seen comes from forcing students to deny who they are. True order comes from respect and understanding." The hearing made national headlines, but what truly captured public attention was a video that went viral the next day. A group of Lincoln Heights students had created a powerful montage of young people from different faiths sharing their experiences of religious discrimination in schools. The video ended with Amira's simple statement, "Our faith doesn't divide us, intolerance does." As the legal battle intensified, unexpected allies emerged. Religious leaders from various faiths united in support of the Lincoln Heights policy. Rabbi Goldstein organized an interfaith council that issued a joint statement supporting religious accommodation in schools. Even some conservative religious organizations, initially skeptical, began to recognize that protecting Muslim students' rights meant protecting all religious rights. Maxwell Sterling and the ATVI pressed forward with their legal challenge, filing motions in federal court. But Usha had anticipated their strategy. She had compiled extensive documentation showing how religious accommodation policies had successfully been implemented in schools across the country without disrupting education. The turning point came during a preliminary hearing when Usha presented testimony from education experts showing that schools with inclusive religious policies actually demonstrated higher academic achievement and lower instances of bullying. "Your Honor," Usha argued, "the opposition would have you believe that religious accommodation threatens educational standards. The evidence shows the opposite. When students feel respected and included, they perform better academically and socially." The judge's preliminary ruling favored Lincoln Heights, but Usha knew the ATVI would appeal. She worked late into the night preparing for the next phase of the battle when she received an unexpected visit from Robert Henderson. "Ms. Vance," he said, I've been thinking about what you said at the community forum. My grandmother didn't just hide her Star of David. She eventually stopped wearing it altogether. She lost a part of herself trying to fit in. I can't let that happen to another generation. Henderson's public change of heart influenced other opponents. Local business leaders who had supported the ATVI began withdrawing their backing. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't about special treatment, but about protecting fundamental American values. Amira, watching these developments unfold, continued to inspire others. She organized a student-led conference on religious freedom in schools, bringing together students from different faiths to share their experiences and strategies for promoting understanding. During the conference, a Christian student named Rachel Martinez shared how Amira's courage had inspired her to wear her cross necklace proudly, despite her school's restrictive policies. Amira showed me that standing up for your faith isn't just about yourself. It's about standing up for everyone's right to be who they are. As the chapter draws to a close, Usha receives word that the ATVI is considering dropping their challenge. But before she can celebrate, another crisis emerges. A school district in California has just suspended several Muslim students for wearing hijabs, citing Lincoln Heights as a controversy they want to avoid. Usha looks at the stack of cases on her desk, each representing another student fighting for their rights. She picks up her phone to call Amira. "Remember when you thought this was just about one school's dress code?" she asks. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest stands." Have you ever witnessed someone's perspective completely change on an important issue? How has standing up for your beliefs inspired others to do the same? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for our final chapter, where we'll see how this local victory transforms into a national movement for change. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage and justice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the Supreme Court as Usha Vance stood quietly, reviewing her notes one last time. 6 months had passed since the Lincoln Heights victory, and what began as a local dress code dispute had evolved into one of the most significant religious freedom cases in recent history. The California school district's decision to suspend Muslim students had backfired spectacularly, triggering a wave of civil rights lawsuits across the country. Rather than containing the controversy, they had created exactly what they feared: a national movement that could no longer be ignored. Inside the Supreme Court chamber, Usha caught sight of Amira and her family in the public gallery. The young student who had started it all was now addressing the United Nations Youth Forum on religious freedom. Her story had become a beacon of hope for students worldwide. "May it please the court," Usha began, her voice steady and clear. "This case is about more than dress codes or religious symbols. It's about America's promise of religious freedom and whether we truly mean it for all Americans." As she presented her arguments, a surprising figure sat in the audience: Maxwell Sterling, her former opponent from the ATVI. The man who had once fought against religious accommodation was now watching with a different perspective, having resigned from his position after his own daughter decided to convert to Islam. The questions from the justices were pointed and challenging. Justice Thompson leaned forward. "Ms. Vance, where do we draw the line? If we allow religious accommodations, what prevents a complete breakdown of school discipline?" Usha's response was measured but powerful. "Your Honor, the evidence from schools that have implemented religious accommodation policies shows the opposite. When students are allowed to express their faith within reasonable bounds, discipline problems decrease. They feel respected, valued, and more invested in their education. Outside the courtroom, thousands gathered in support. Students from different faiths stood together, wearing their religious symbols proudly: hijabs, yarmulkes, crosses, and turbans. They carried signs reading, "My faith, my future," and "United in diversity." Back at Lincoln Heights, Principal Davidson had transformed the school into a model of inclusive education. Educators from across the country visited to learn from their experience. The school's academic performance had improved, and incidents of bullying had dropped significantly. When we stopped fighting our students' identities and started celebrating them, Davidson explained to a group of visiting principals, everything changed. These aren't just policies. They're statements about who we are as a community. The Supreme Court's decision was expected to take months, but the movement continued to grow. Amira's Instagram following had reached over 1 million, and she used her platform to share stories of other students fighting for their rights. Each post ended with her signature phrase, "Faith moves mountains, but courage moves hearts." One evening, as Usha worked late in her office, she received an unexpected call. It was from a Supreme Court clerk. The justices had reached their decision ahead of schedule. The anticipation was palpable as the nation waited for the announcement. The morning of the decision, the steps of the Supreme Court were packed with supporters and media. Chief Justice Roberts' words echoed through the chamber. In a 7-2 decision, the court finds that religious accommodation in public schools, when implemented within reasonable bounds, not only aligns with the First Amendment, but upholds the very principles upon which our nation was founded. The victory was comprehensive. The court's decision established clear guidelines for religious accommodation in schools while protecting educational standards. It was everything they had fought for and more, but the real impact was felt in classrooms across America. Students who had hidden their faith for years finally felt free to be themselves. Schools that had resisted change now had clear guidance on how to create inclusive environments. Maxwell Sterling, in a surprising turn of events, held a press conference announcing the creation of the Religious Freedom in Education Foundation. "I was wrong," he admitted publicly. "Sometimes it takes seeing the world through someone else's eyes to understand the truth." Amira's locker, once vandalized with hate, became a symbol of transformation. Students had covered it with thousands of small notes, each sharing a personal story of faith and courage. The school preserved it as a permanent installation, a reminder of how far they had come. Principal Davidson, speaking at the National Educators Conference, shared the lasting impact of their journey. "We didn't just change a policy, we changed hearts and minds. We showed that religious freedom and educational excellence aren't opposing forces, they're complementary strengths." Representative Gonzalez's legislation, bolstered by the Supreme Court decision, passed with bipartisan support. The Religious Freedom in Education Act provided federal protection for students' religious rights while establishing clear guidelines for schools. Usha Vance, reflecting on their journey, addressed a graduating class. "Legal victories matter, but the real change happens in daily interactions, in moments when we choose understanding over fear, inclusion over division." The movement sparked by Lincoln Heights continued to evolve. Students created interfaith councils, organizing events that celebrated religious diversity. The My Faith, My Right campaign became an international movement with chapters in schools across the globe. During a special ceremony at Lincoln Heights, Amira unveiled a new mural painted by students of different faiths. It depicted various religious symbols intertwined with educational imagery, bearing the inscription, "Knowledge enlightens the mind, faith illuminates the soul." Robert Henderson, once their strongest opponent, now served on the school board's diversity committee. "My daughter Emma taught me that tradition isn't about staying the same," he said during a community meeting. It's about passing down our best values, including the value of growth and understanding. The final triumph came when the Department of Education adopted Lincoln Heights' policies as a national model. Schools across the country received guidance and support in implementing religious accommodation practices that worked for their communities. Usha's law office became a center for civil rights advocacy, training a new generation of lawyers dedicated to protecting religious freedom. She never forgot the lesson of Lincoln Heights, that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest stands. As the school year ended, Amira prepared to graduate. Her valedictorian speech captured the essence of their journey. We didn't just fight for the right to wear hijabs or crosses or yarmulkes. We fought for the right to be fully ourselves, to bring our whole selves to school every day. And in doing so, we made our school and our country stronger. The story of Lincoln Heights became more than a legal case. It became a testament to the power of standing up for what's right. As Usha watched Amira receive her diploma, she remembered their first meeting when a scared but determined student refused to choose between her faith and her education. The chapter closes with Usha receiving a letter from a small town in Texas where another student faces discrimination. She smiles, picks up her phone, and begins dialing. The work continues, but now they're not alone. They're part of a movement that started with one student, one lawyer, and one unwavering belief in justice. Have you ever been part of a movement that started small but grew beyond expectations? How has standing up for your beliefs changed your community? Share your stories in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage, justice, and the power of standing together. Because sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single voice saying, "This is who I am, and I won't hide anymore."